Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. It's the end of an era. After 16 years in power, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is stepping down. She's often been called a pragmatist rather than a visionary, but she's certainly been a key player on the European and world stage, steering the response to the global financial crisis, the Eurozone debt crisis, the migrant crisis, and COVID. To discuss her legacy and what her departure means for Europe and for transatlantic ties, I'm joined by Joachim Bitterlich. He advised Chancellor Helmut Kohl on European diplomatic and security matters in the 1980s and 90s. He was also Germany's ambassador to NATO in the late 90s, and he joins me from Berlin. Thank you so much, Mr. Bitterlich, for being my guest. How do you think Angela Merkel ranks among post-war German chancellors?
Well, historians will tell us in some years. Please, I take the title of a last economist who said it's the mess now behind Angela Merkel. It's perhaps explained a bit in a too negative way. Angela Merkel has been, for the last 16 years, what I call the crisis manager of especially European affairs. And she has done, at the end, well, this job. The problem is, well, the Germans have to look now at a series of challenges, of real challenges for reassuring their future. And the former governments under Mrs. Merkel, either with the Liberals or with the Social Democrats, have not really preparing Germany to these challenges.
We'll talk more about...
including climate change, including the future of German industry.
Yeah, we'll talk about those challenges in a minute, but I just want to stay on Angela Merkel for a moment. You have described her as a European of the head, not of the heart. What do you mean by that?
She has been what I call a rational European. Don't forget, Angela Merkel has been, let's say, politically socialized at the age of 35. She came from a rigid communist system in the East. And for her, the most important in the beginning was what I call freedom. Freedom of movement, freedom of speech, or all the aspects of freedom. She had no experience in European affairs. She had to learn this in the 90s, twice as a minister. And don't forget, please, who has made possible the compromise, the first worldwide compromise on climate change in Kyoto in 1997. It was the young German Minister of the Environment, Angela Merkel. Don't forget this. And she has, let's say, got this experience step by step, but she has never been in politics a visionary. She has always been, let's call it, pragmatist.
Yeah.
Listening to all the involved parties, and then trying to resolve the problem, what I call at the most pragmatist level.
You sound quite worried because you're saying effectively that the current German political establishment is even less visionary and doesn't really have a plan for Germany's future.
And this is really, I'm in a certain way preoccupied when I look at the campaign of the last months. And even at the debate, the last debate, for the first time they were discussing what I call the real subjects the Germans have to look after. First of all, the example, the future of the German industry in a world that has totally changed, the future of technologies in various areas, climate change. The Germans have, till today, what I call the German energy policy is, in my eyes, the worst case. Yeah. How to come out of this, how to develop something which is sensitive, which is for people, and at the same time for industry. The German infrastructure, when you look at the digitalization of Germany, when you look at the status of the administration in Germany, when you look at the fact that during the COVID crisis, all, let's say, the numbers of newly ill people had been to transmit by fax and not by mobile or by SMS or by mail. Please, it's a delay. The Germans have to hurry up in this field.
Yeah.
And the Germans have, let's say, to speed up. And I don't see up till now a real, let's say, a perception and a clear view of how to tackle these problems.
I want to ask you about some of the big international security issues. And as I said in the introduction, you were Germany's ambassador to NATO. How do you think Germany, how does Germany see this crisis, this submarine crisis, in which France clearly feels very betrayed by Australia and the United States? And of course, Germany officially has expressed solidarity with France, but at the same time, Germany has also struck up a new space alliance agreement with Australia. Is that a stab in the back to President Macron?
No, in my eyes, not at all. I think it's a contrary. It's perhaps a bad moment. Typically, let's say, among military people, a meeting foreseen since a certain time. And don't forget, the Germans are discovering the Indo-Pacific area. And the Germans were the first who have been developed a certain, let's call it strategy, towards that, a new strategy towards that region. And the idea is to develop from there a European strategy towards the region. The French have always been present in that region, not the Germans. The Germans less. The Germans had discovered the region 30 or 40 years ago with regard to ASEAN. It was Hans-Dietrich Genscher, today forgotten, let's say, in international politics. And the Europeans have had put aside this whole region. We were looking at China, full stop. And they have been rediscovering, let's say, India, rediscovering Indonesia, rediscovering even Singapore, or rediscovering Australia.
Okay, but
and therefore, I think the most important should be that the Europeans launch their reflections and develop a strategy.
But does Germany not have to make a choice at some point? I mean, the warship that it sent, the Bayern or Bavaria, was actually denied entry into the port of Shanghai by the Chinese. Does Germany have to decide who it really wants to work with in the Indo-Pacific? Is it the Quad, the US, Australia, India and Japan, or is it France? Or does it not have to make that kind of choice, in your opinion?
I think the choice has to be a European one, full stop. This is the most decisive. The Europeans should develop rapidly together a real strategy towards that region. This is, for me, the most important in front of us.
But
it's normal that the French, who have a certain experience, should be, let's say, in a way, lead nation toward that area. It's normal. But means, too, that we need a certain review of our policy towards China.
Do you see Germany going as far? Is there a willingness in Berlin to go as far as President Macron wants to go in terms of autonomous European defense, apart from outside NATO?
You know, strategic autonomy is a wide subject. And I think it has not been, let's say, well introduced. I'm not a friend of the expression of European sovereignty. I prefer strategic autonomy, which has to develop differently in different areas. I'm in favor of a strategic autonomy even in the military field. But I think the work has to begin with the Germans. Today, there is not a majority in German parliament, let's say, to execute what I call defense in a French way, or security policy in the French way. I think there has to begin, let's say, conviction and education, a mixture. But the French have to convince the Germans, let's say, to follow. Today in German parliament, only the Christian Democrats are in favor, even of a strategic autonomy of Europe, yes, but in conjunction at the same time as with NATO in the military field, yes, but the other parties are far away from that move.
Yeah.
And therefore there has to begin a real work of convincing, of educating to some extent towards such a future policy.
Just briefly, if you could, you told me in an interview a year or two ago that the Franco-German relationship had become superficial. Do you expect that trend to continue after this German election?
You know, I defend this thesis till now, and I think it's so strange that we are, let's say, still unknown neighbors to a certain extent. And my hope today is a new German-French institution, which is the German-French Parliamentary Assembly, which begins really to work and that could develop, let's say, a new knowledge, a new, let's say, reflex on both sides, on the French side as on the German side, and to look again into even what I call difficult subjects. Look at the closure of the borders last spring by the Germans, where I think this assembly has been extremely helpful to overcome this period. And we need, let's say, much more people decoding to the other side what we should and what we can do together. Okay. And there should be an extremely hard work to do.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your insights. Joachim Bitterlich, former advisor to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and former ambassador of Germany to NATO. And I'll be back for part 2 of Talking Europe after the news bulletin.